Bittensor has got two kind of quite unique value adds, I think. And they are either subsidized and very cheap compute, or it's access to a lot of, again, subsidized, very intelligent engineers. So like really, whenever you're designing a subnet, those are the two things you can pull on within the space to then try and provide an incentive mechanism which will allow you to then produce some kind of valuable output. We can create a scalable approach to mining. Our background was very much in due diligence of consultancy. We've always been thinking, how can we make this both organization and then also kind of more broadly Bittensor an ecosystem that institutional and larger professional investors could get involved in? Because I think often cryptocurrency is seen as a bit of kind of a bad word. There's bad connotations with it. Everyone kind of thinks it's where people put their drug money and all this kind of stuff. But we're kind of thinking, how can we wrap up ourselves in such a way and present ourselves in such a way that institutional investors could get really excited about getting involved? And in doing just that, we kind of laid a roadmap out about when we started. And
mining was sort of popping our toes in the water and seeing if we could steady ourselves and seeing if we could swim. Subnet incubation is certainly on our roadmap. We also see a necessity in different levels and standards of validators within the space. That's something we're actively pursuing, and we should have some quite exciting news shortly on that front. We also have quite a large asset management play planned in our playbook. So as you can probably see, we class them as 4 pillars of our organization, and we're in the process over the next 6 to 12 months pushing out in all avenues on that front to be within a team that's now 10, to look that we've got a hiring plan to take us to 60 to 70 heads within 12 months. You're a real technology business at that point, and we believe would be one of the most recognized Bittensor holding companies there are. We've got a really big, audacious goal. The pathway that we've sort of outlined is not impossible. It's all just completing the actions.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Gyles and Jack, co-founders of Tensora, a fully doxed mining team in the Bittensor ecosystem. With a unique blend of expertise stemming from traditional machine learning backgrounds, they're driving innovation in mining solutions, emphasizing integrity, collaboration, and fair competition. We'll dive into their approach, including subnet analysis, incentive mechanisms, and ethical practices, as they share their vision for the future of decentralized intelligence and its potential to disrupt traditional AI development. And now, back to Jack and Gyles with the 20th Ventura Labs podcast.
Can you guys introduce yourself and how you guys came together, what you guys are doing?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Gyles. I'm CEO and co-founder of Tensora. We launched Tensora back in April of last year. I'd been involved in Bittensor for about a year before then as a personal investor. But during sort of the time period from April to date, we've been focused solely on mining, and we've sort of been one of the only doxed mining teams within the space. We're now a team of over 10 within our engineering team and scaling quickly. I don't know, Jack, if there's anything that you'd want to add there.
Yeah. So Jack, co-founder alongside Gyles, both started together on the CTO, and I head up kind of the technical side of what we do, in particular with a kind of particular focus on the mining. So we're completely mining focused as a team at the moment. And I think it's an interesting space or side of Bittensor to be on, because I think it's quite different from a lot of the other kind of doxed organizations, kind of public organizations. But yeah, it's been great fun.
And you guys are a doxed mining team, like you said. How did you guys find Bittensor initially?
Yeah, that was myself back in 2023, January. I've heard I had a conversation with Mog in California at the DCG event, and it's the same way he found it. So I came across Dread Bongo on Twitter, and I feel like it's a very common thing that you hear across the ecosystem. I was disillusioned with putting money into a lifetime savings account. It's like a LISA, it's called over here in the UK. And so I just started I just saw Bittensor, gathered as much as I could, and sort of tried to understand what it was at a really basic level from Twitter and what I could find, and it really interested me. So I guess I then was sort of invested in it for 6 to 7 months. I was working at a consulting firm with Jack, and then Jack being the data scientist within the team, I was pestering him to get involved. So yeah, that was my journey in.
Yeah, mine from the. I've always been like a big cryptocurrency skeptic. I've always thought it's doesn't have a particular strong use case within kind of technology and the real world, I guess, out of being kind of a store of value. But I think Bittensor. So initially when Gyles was kind of saying, "Hey Jack, have a look at this. This is in cryptocurrency," I was just like, "I'm not interested. It's probably But then it kind of managed to convince me to have a first look, and I was like, all right, okay, start digging into it. And then I just realized actually the potential of what's going on here is it's not really about the cryptocurrency. It's about what the cryptocurrency is incentivizing, which is just a whole heap of really interesting kind of work, open source innovation, and I think as soon as I saw that and I kind of realized like, wow, there's actually a lot going on here and I can see a real future here, probably for the first time personally within kind of a cryptocurrency protocol. But then that's, kind of stepping into it, I think my eyes have been kind of open more broadly to the space, and actually a lot of, not just Bittensor, but there's a lot more interesting things going on in cryptocurrency than I first kind of initially thought. So yeah, I started as a skeptic. Now I'm, very bullish on Tau. Yeah.
Yeah. Dread Bongo, I has brought a lot of people in himself that are contributing heavily to the ecosystem now. And you guys have Tensora, a mining group. What is the mission of this group? What is the purpose of this group? Why did it come together?
When we first launched Tensora, I think it's important to highlight that we brought an entire thesis to building Tensora, and mining was sort of popping our toes in the water and seeing if we could steady ourselves and seeing if we could swim. We see Bittensor, we're incredibly bullish on Bittensor long term. What that looks like from not only mining, which has really helped us build a strong knowledge base internally of what does a robust subnet look like, how do people exploit it, how would they consider exploiting it, how do you market a subnet well. So subnet incubation is certainly on our roadmap. We also see the requirement and sort of a necessity in different levels and standards of validators within the space, and we feel like we could add really strong value there. And that's something we're actively pursuing, and we should have some quite exciting news shortly on that front. And then the other side of that is the other individual who isn't named within our organization and has his name on it yet, our sort of lead investor and self-funder to date, is an incredibly interesting, exciting individual to have within Bittensor, who is going to unlock a tremendous amount of value. So we also have quite a large asset management play planned in our playbook. So as you can probably see, we class them as 4 pillars of our organization, and we're in the process over the next 6 to 12 months pushing out in all avenues on that front.
Yep.
What are you guys currently working on in the micro? What is your focus right now?
Focus is on kind of building out, and is what's been for the last 6 months is building out really a proof of concept that we can create a scalable approach to mining. So me and Gyles, from kind of day one, we've had our kind of professional, our background was very much in due diligence of consultancy. So we worked in a consultancy firm that did kind of mid-market private equity due diligence. So we've always been thinking, okay, how can we make this both organization and then also kind of more broadly Bittensor an ecosystem that institutional and larger professional investors could get involved in? Because I think often cryptocurrency is seen as a bit of kind of a bad word. There's bad connotations with it, right? Everyone kind of thinks it's where people put their drug money and all this kind of stuff. But like we're kind of thinking, okay, right, how can we wrap up ourselves in such a way and present ourselves in such a way that institutional investors could get really excited about getting involved? And so in doing just that, we kind of laid a roadmap out about when we started, and I think we're kind of finished really the first stage of that, which was can we prove that we can build a framework for mining in teams, which is scalable, such that if we received a large portion of investment, we could actually go and do a lot with that. And that's kind of the first of those 4 pillars that Gyles is kind of mentioning. And very much at the moment, as Gyles said, there's a lot of exciting things going on behind the scenes. I think we're going to have some really exciting updates for the ecosystem from our updates for kind of Tensora publicly very soon, as we look to expand into those other kind of three verticals. So yeah, at the moment, it's been a sole focus on mining, and that's been to prove concept and then also learn a lot. But yeah, I think it's going to be much more than that in the future.
And then Gyles, you had touched on potentially being a subnet incubator in the future. What would that look like for you guys, that transition from mining to subnet incubation and validating potentially?
Yeah, I mean, we'd continue to we will always continue to double down on mining. That's, if you can call it 8 months, you could probably call it our heritage, is where it's sort of laid in mining. But with that subnet incubation piece, it ties in beautifully to having a mining team to really understanding, like, can they stress test this before a subnet launches? I think we've seen it countless times where subnets go live and like all hell breaks loose on week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, and it's patch after patch after patch, which I appreciate has to happen sometimes. But I think what we're looking for with Tensora as a subnet incubator is that there will be a real step up in the professionalism and the output of subnets, of the release cadence of subnets, to bring maturity, to see it as to that point that Jack shared earlier, you know, that institutional investors in this whole world of detail will see the products and our subnets alpha token as something that they want to get in bed with, that this team does what they say they do on time. So that subnet team, we're in the process of building that out and bringing in some individuals to lead on that front. And then the other side with the validator as well, exact same messaging. We want to run a validator, and that when the validator validates a specific subnet, it's a blue tick of approval that this subnet is robust, it's fair competition, it adds great value to the ecosystem, and it's there's in my mind there's been some value extraction that's been a real shame, and the whole ethos of Tensora is how do we add value to Bittensor? Because if everyone just continues to extract value, Bittensor won't last. And when the verticals that we've shared in the investment that we're sort of aiming towards, sort of, you know, in terms of time sink and then also dollars, this has to be a 10 plus 20 plus year ecosystem.
How do you envision your future compared to these other groups in this type of space, like Yuma or General Tao Ventures or even TensorPlex? How do you guys compare to those groups? What do you think your advantages are against them? Or differences in approaches?
I think. Sorry, Jack. After you, no, you go for it.
I think one distinct advantage, and then I say one distinct one difference. So like, I think our advantage coming into this from the mining side of things, I think we've got a perspective on subnet development and also the ecosystem, which is quite unique. We have built relationships with a lot of other kind of mining teams in the space. And I think we have quite a wide network of miners, which I think is often the undervalued group within the space. I think a lot of people think, like miners just do whatever they can to kind of exploit things. But really, actually, the miners within Bittensor are the valuable thing, because the miners are the ones that solve the problems. The miners are the ones that provide the compute. The miners are the ones that actually innovate. So I think starting from that place and understanding, okay, well, what are the pain points been for us? I think is really valuable as we look to expand, because we can start to think about, okay, we're going to be developing subnets. How can we actually encourage the best miners that we know? We know of a few great mining teams. How can we encourage them to be involved? Like, what do they not like? What have we not liked about certain subnets? Because there are some we avoid generally because of the way that they run the subnet. And it's not even particularly to do with the quality of the product they're trying to create. It's actually just to do with their practices and the fact that often at the moment, I think the power of validators is very high within Bittensor. So when subnet owners listen to someone, they'll listen to validators. And I don't think a lot of validators are actually all that plugged into what kind of is like to be a miner and the impacts of certain decisions on miners. So I think that perspective is one thing that sets us apart. I think the vision, I think broadly, the more companies, the more high quality companies and institutions and groups involved in Bittensor, the better. Like I think this ecosystem is way too big for there to be one group that's dominating. So like we are a massive fan of like some of the names that you kind of mentioned. We love the guys over at Tensorplex. I think the work they're doing is just great. A whole bunch of other subnet kind of development teams we really like. Same with the validator groups, like you kind of mentioned. I've been quite close with a few, Roundtable 21, and a few others, Bittensor Guru and whatnot. So I think the space is big enough for a lot really big players to kind of mature and grow and succeed. So like we'd love to be Tensora, in 3 to 5 years' time. We'd love our name to be up there in that kind of group. When people throw out names of large contributors to the space, I think that's probably our vision, is to be right up there in that. But maybe the distinguishing factor is, and the thing that's maybe different in our vision, is how important, I think what we've realized is that what the space really lacks, as Gyles mentioned and this is our desire behind Validator, is fair, what's the word for it? Well, it would be kind of a validator that, or like a team, a group that really is trying to push integrity within the space. So something which we've seen so many times, being a miner in particular, is you'll be trying to compete on a certain subnet and you just cannot get your foot in the door. And it's trying to understand, okay, I think after we've been in the space for a certain period of time, we've started to realize why that is. And it's because there's not always fair competition on subnets, to put it lightly, both in terms of the validators and then also subnet owners. And I think what we'd love to do and see, and I think this should be a natural growth as Bittensor matures, is just an increasing amount of fair competition. Like we have always said, hey, if you can compete and beat us fairly, that's great, because that's what Bittensor is all about. But if it's unfair, like we don't really want to have anything to do with it. So our vision is we'd love to become big enough that we could be a bit of an umbrella of protection around certain subnet owners or mining groups, where we can actually carve out a space within Bittensor where there isn't any exploitation going on or backhanded deals. And these are, for example, as Gyles mentioned, that kind of blue tick of this subnet is one that we validate and we know that it's a fair place to compete. So come and try, kind of thing. And I think that maybe would be kind of the thing which we'd want to, if people were throwing names out there, what we'd love our name to be put up there and describes, connotations that came with Tensora would be bringing that kind of fair competition into the space.
You made a good point, or an interesting point there, with miners are the only ones that truly know the value of what is created because they did the creation of whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
How do you identify red flags in subnets to where you're like, hey, this competition isn't fair, or this isn't a good competition?
Yeah. That's a good point. Really good question. I think, so there's a few different areas. So one on just the purely code side of things, I think quite quickly you can see how much effort a teams actually put into their code base. I think it's very easy to spin a narrative around all the amazing work and the addressable market, potential addressable market of your subnet and all this kind of stuff. And actually, when you dive into the code and we're the ones that are solving the problems, we're like, this is just so low quality. I think quite quickly, within a day or two, you can very much see that, maybe even shorter. But then on the other side of that as well, and this is kind of, Gyles handles this and is really good at it, is we want to work quite closely with the subnet owners themselves. So that we often, when we're competing, we'll have intro calls with them and say, hey, look, we're thinking about moving in on your subnet, and we'll have those kind of conversations and hear firsthand what their vision is and hear firsthand from them what they want to see. And I think it's quite telling. Some subnet owners love the fact they've got a doxed mining team working on their subnet, and they just, they love the fact that there's going to be more competition, and that's just going to drive innovation. Others hold us a little bit more at arm's length, and I think that's always an interesting thing. But yeah, there's, as you mine, as you get into it, and through those conversations, you can often tell quite quickly where to kind of invest your resources, where not to.
And how would you describe your guys' approach to mining generally? I guess when deciding what subnets you do decide to mine on.
It comes down to, as I said, we've got a team of 10 machine learning engineers now at Tensora who are all, fully salaried employees who we didn't hire anyone from within the community. So they're all UK based. And our decision for that was that we wanted to bring talent who'd been exposed to AI, ML problems outside of crypto into Bittensor. So we've been very, very fortunate to hire some disgustingly bright individuals, and we're constantly humbled by the talent within our team every day. And so we've got a real sort of, I guess, knowledge base and niche currently within computer vision. So that's where we've been spending quite a bit of our time. And then also, so that's really when we're looking at the subnets that we're considering, it's, which of those fit the specialisms for a current squad that's available within the team. And then if that squad is available, it's looking at the subnets. We have some, I guess, guiding practices of which subnets to focus on and which not, just from experience of, has this subnet been known to be self-mining 80% of their subnet before? Let's stay away. For instance, if that's the case, and then we look at, the validators, the weights they're setting, is there anything that we should be aware of there? But then also looking down at the distribution of the curve, is it flat? Or can we carve out a competitive edge within the subnet? Can we actually build a better model that makes sense, that will incentivize us to do so, and is a good use of R&D spend? That process for us can take 2 to 3 weeks. And it's a real deep dive into that subnet to really understand. And then following that, do they want to speak to us? Do they want to have a call with us? Are they interested in discussing ideas, feedback? Some teams have been incredibly receptive to feedback, and some that we hold in really high regard. So for instance, Bitmind, really, really quality operation. We really like the guys there. One of my favorite moments I think I've had at Tensora was we had a call with Bitmind where we were discussing with them a team on team session, and one of our engineers presented feedback on their sort of distribution curve, and we had this just back and forth around how do we make this better. And it's not even the case of how do you make it better for Tensora, it's how do you make it better for Bitmind? And look, there was a time period for about 2 weeks after that where we actually got impacted by the decisions of that conversation, but it showed that it bettered the subnet and it made competition, fair and more competitive. So I think that's a real win when those sort of moments happen. So to answer your question, it's a very sort of, I guess, long tick list of things that, does this feel right? Does this make sense before we get to the stage before we start mining on a subnet?
I gotta ask, the viral picture of you guys pointing at the distribution curve, was that Bitmine?
It was, yeah.
Everybody wants to know. There's been speculation.
Yeah, that's Bitmind, yeah.
There you go. Now everyone knows. So what would you say the job is of a miner? Would you say it's just maximize your score in a particular subnet under that scoring, or is it, try to produce the best intelligence you can, or would you categorize it a different way?
I think this is one of the beauties of Bittensor. I think it's the incentive mechanisms are just so powerful, because at the end of the day, we're trying to run, in the simplest way, we're trying to run this company to make money, right? So miners are involved in the space to earn tau. Now, it's the subnet owners who need to craft the incentive mechanism in such a way that the effort and the really high incentive and reward for putting in that effort is targeted and directed in the right direction. So if the incentive mechanism is bad, then you can't just expect miners to not pursue the kind of the path of least resistance to get the most tau, and to follow your loose narrative of what you'd like them to do. They're going to do what they need to do to compete against that incentive mechanism. So I would say from a miner's perspective, really it's just to place the incentive mechanism to the absolute best possible way. Now, we as a kind of broader company then also see a real value add of us if we see an incentive mechanism is not set up well and it's incentivizing us to do something, or there's a massive exploit which we can take advantage of to work around the incentive mechanism. Generally, what we will try and always do is have conversations with the subnet owners where it's possible to and where they're open to it, and we'll help them kind of craft that and kind of improve things. Because I think otherwise the long-term value of Bittensor is just not going to go up. If the work that miners are doing is not actually useful, I think, and we're just able to exploit all the incentive mechanisms, then the value of tau over the years is just not going to go up, and that kind of 20-year vision that we're hoping for where tau could be just won't be realized. So yeah, on the micro level, I think it's just purely playing to the incentive mechanism. On a more macro level, us at Tensora, we love to play the role of actually being able to help kind of craft those incentive mechanisms to get miners to do actual useful things.
So you guys approach mining in what would be kind of viewed as a more ethical type of light. It's where you see an exploit and you're like, hey, let's actually try to fix this, instead of, hey, let's, take advantage of this and try to generate money now because you're looking for the long term there. Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yeah, I feel like, and we've had a number of times this has happened, I think you can never underestimate the quality of engineers behind the different UIDs within Bittensor. Like, there's some demons out there. And so if we can find it, and I say this with complete and utter respect, they will find it as well. And so neither of us are really crafting an edge, in the competition. We're just working around it. And so, yeah, there's some short-term gain, but that will very quickly, I'm sure there will be 6, 7, 10 different teams will find that exact same edge, and you get a flat curve. The validators hate flat curves. The weights will drop, and we'll all be left holding an R&D budget that we'd spent 4 to 6 weeks on, and we'll have just pissed a load of towel up the wall because we wasted an opportunity of working on a really interesting problem because we tried to grift it. So, yeah, I just don't think if you're playing the long-term game, exploiting a subnet, it's not going to work, like, as a miner. Yeah, I just would never underestimate the quality of miners in Bittensor, and so us all playing like on a level playing field is probably the best place to start.
Yeah. All the best miners I've talked to have all gave the same answer, as for long term, you have to solve those exploits. You can't just take advantage of them, because then it basically destroys the competition or undermines the competition in the long term.
Yeah.
What would you guys say is the overarching principles or ideas that guide Tensora when, going through the Bittensor ecosystem, going through this long-term process?
Do you want to go, Chad?
Yeah. Well, our internal, we've got 3 internal values, and some of them not particularly useful for answering this question, but one of them is which is humility. So, like, we have, for our culture, we just realize that we have to always realize we're not the smartest people in the room, is what we say internally, but as it's like, and even more so externally, it's like we are not the smartest team within Bittensor. So therefore, in every single situation, you're going to have to expect that you're coming up against someone that's smarter than you. So, like, we're going to have to work really hard and try and think outside the box. So generally, that means that we have this kind of approach of like no stone left unturned when it comes to innovation. So when we do our brainstorming sessions, when the guys go and do their research, we have to go really, really deep. The stuff that people come up with, you're fighting over models that are 98.9% and 99% accurate. You're not, in the real world, 95% is perfect. So we'll roll that into production here. It just doesn't even get you anything. So which makes it an incredibly interesting space to work in, but also a humbling kind of process. So yeah, that's one of them. And the second one I would say is integrity, and I think we want to try and be a mining team that has integrity with what we do. So it's you've got to play to the field in front of you, otherwise you couldn't earn any money. So like we are here to be profit driven. So where mining team subnet owners are not working with us, generally we'll either move on quickly, or where we find, I think there's exploits and then there's smart ways of implementing solutions. So like, that doesn't mean that we never take advantage of anything, but generally if we see a subnet team are really pushing for kind of the long-term vision of Bittensor and the stuff they're doing is really innovative, we will always open up a conversation and say, hey, look, this is what we found. Let's patch it off and kind of see things improved. So those would be the two things which I say, and we really want to carry that and kind of carry that, I guess, brand image that I think we have started to build within the space of being a player that has integrity with us as we look to kind of develop subnets, incubate subnets, and then also potentially entering that kind of validator space as well.
You guys have touched on this already, but you guys say you work with the subnet owner. You'll talk to them, basically have an intro call, and you view it as more of a collaborative process with a subnet owner. How close are you guys with validators? And do you even work with other mining teams at all? Is there any cross-miner collaboration or anything in that aspect?
Yeah, I think in terms of direct relationship with a validator, we don't. What I'd say is there's not that many of us in Bittensor yet, so everybody knows everyone, it feels like. But we hold some validators in really high regard. So Bittensor Guru, Roundtable 21, and OTF, Tau Stats, just like credible names of validators. And then in terms of mining teams or mining individuals, we've on a number of times partnered with different sort of syndicates of individuals, and some names that come to my head. And so, yeah, that's been really useful, especially when there is, as you say, as Jack said earlier, there's so much you can do with an incentive mechanism, and sometimes you just don't have that exact skill set required, or you have it, but not to the level of depth that you need to go in Bittensor to make the thing work. But then we've also got 10 amazing ML engineers internally that will also be really valuable to someone with more of a DevOps background. So we've certainly collaborated on that front in the past. But I'd say, yeah, the standard is just incredibly high. And it's worked really well on that relationship basis to date. I am aware of some people that have been burnt by sort of collaborating with miners in the space because the reward is so high. But I think that's probably what makes us somewhat attractive. We're doxed. You can find us on Companies House in the UK. We've signed formal agreements with people beforehand just to get them comfortable that we're not here to rip anyone off. We're here to do the job properly and all take home some profit at the end of the day, and for the subnet to do what it's meant to do.
Yeah. How do you guys view, or I guess how does Tensora view what is produced by subnets? People call it intelligence, people call it commodities, people call it super commodities. How do you guys view what is produced by Bittensor?
I think Bittensor has got two kind of quite unique value adds, I think, and they are either subsidized and very cheap compute, or it's access to a lot of, again, subsidized, very intelligent engineers. Really, whenever you're designing a subnet, those are the two things you can pull on within the space to then try and, as we mentioned before, provide an incentive mechanism which will allow you to then produce some kind of valuable output. So the subnets, they come in all shapes and sizes, but the ones that really excite me are the ones that are set up in such a way that the work of miners is collaborative. So while you benefit from outcompeting, actually the kind of the end result of your work after you're rewarded is something which is then open sourced. So, thinking about some of the fine tuning subnets, Subnet 61 has got an interesting red team. Have got an interesting way of doing this where you kind of Dockerize your code and then you share it and it can actually be picked up by others. Same with kind of gradients on 56. So yeah, it's hard to kind of pinpoint because so many of the different subnets do so many different things, right? Subnet 51 is providing discounted compute, which is for so many different kind of organizations outside of Bittensor is a real blocker for them being able to innovate is their access to GPUs because they're so expensive. So the fact that here in Bittensor we've got a GPU platform that's providing very cheap compute for them, that could have some really interesting, or lead to some really interesting empowerment of kind of startups and innovation and research teams that couldn't afford it otherwise. So yeah, I don't know. It's so broad, and I think that's the beauty of Bittensor. Couldn't really. I don't know if Gyles, you've got a different view or anything.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, I think to your point, Jack, I don't think, and this is no slight on what we've built so far in terms of the subnet team built so far, but I think subnet building is such an art that everybody is still learning. That you haven't probably unlocked the brilliance of the engineers within the Bittensor mining teams yet. So I think we will look where we were 9 months ago at what subnets were doing as to where we are now. I look at shoots, gradients, what they're asking miners to do and achieve now is far greater of that 9 months ago. Imagine where we're going to be in 12, 24 months, as subnet owners learn, improve, and iterate on how to design really robust mechanisms. That's when I think you really start to unlock the talent, because the talent's probably not really being pushed as hard as it can yet.
Yep.
And I think this thing just fucking takes off when it does. I just think it'll get better and better and better. And that's, we've said it a few times, but the beauty of Bittensor.
So you think the pace of innovation will be increasingly exponential, it seems. And how do you guys view decentralized intelligence or decentralized AI production or decentralized production like Bittensor versus, traditional centralized production or development in AI, since most of your engineers, your 10 engineers, are traditional AI ML engineers? What have been the differences? What have been the challenges of the two separate worlds?
Here first, and Giles can definitely add something here, but for me, the thing that gets all of our engineers on board, and they absolutely love it, is there's no customer, or there's no direct customer, right? The way that we're working, or the thing we're working towards, is a score on the leaderboard. And for people who are technically curious and love innovation, love going deep in research, this is almost like doing a PhD, but actually getting paid well for it, right? You're really incentivized to go deep into the problem spaces that you're working in, to learn, to push your code, and just constantly be thinking about stuff which is just so cutting edge and working with the cutting edge technologies. So yeah, I think it's just such an interesting kind of space. And as you kind of mentioned earlier, I really do think the speed of innovation is going to just increase as more intelligent engineers. I think there's going to be, I don't even think we've started to get the top guys in the world yet working in Bittensor. And I think that would probably be the difference, right? At the moment, those guys are probably hidden within kind of your Googles, the Meta teams, like the internal DevOps and AI teams there, and the research teams. And I think what's going to be so amazing about Bittensor is I genuinely think with enough time, if things go well, we'll start being able to pry them out of those teams and start being able to get them into and involved in an ecosystem which doesn't just innovate and then hold and use all the innovation internally in a proprietary way, which is what happens at Google. Or ChatGPT, they come up with a new model, they're not going to release it. Within Bittensor, actually, the incentive and then kind of the open sourcing When those two things come together, I think it's just going to be incredibly powerful because people are just going to be able to continually just build on what's next. I think I think it's just quite unique. And I don't think a centralized team could do that because that would just completely undermine their profit model. So yeah, I think it's quite unique.
How do you guys anticipate it will impact the nature of like employment? Do you still see there being these big centralized entities that employ tons of people, or will it change the nature of how companies are structured, as you guys are one of the largest mining teams at the moment?
I can't imagine it changing the large centralized entities. I think they'll always be here in some form or shape, or probably bigger. I think what it probably enables, and what probably the biggest shake-up I foresee, is in the venture capital world. So the ability, especially in, DTAO, sounds like we don't have reg fees anymore. So you don't have to go on the, let's say you've got 3 brilliant guys who have all met at university that have got an idea, rather than having to pedal away on a pitch deck for 3 months, then go do a tour of the US and spend all your savings on that. You could literally stay in your dorm room, start building a subnet, and then just watch as miners turn up to contribute to your project and your vision and your idea, and then almost like a huge, I guess, room of Lego, start building your startup around you. I think it's the VC world. Like, I think VC is going to dramatically change in this new world that we're stepping into. The blockers of huge AWS bills. I mean, don't get me wrong, ours isn't cheap, but I think for me, that's probably the most exciting thing in terms of like a renegade aspect of VCs won't be taking 50, 80% out of guys anymore. You can build it and you've got something there immediately. Day one, you can start creating revenue and generating product and usage for whatever you want to incentivize.
VC is one of the most like guarded things there is, because you credited investors, those type of things as well, a lot of regulation around it. What are you guys most proud of that Tensora has been able to accomplish in the past year that you've been involved with the network mining? What are you guys most proud of?
Really,
That was still here.
yeah. A lot of the teams you see in the space will start mining and then they'll move into subnet ownership. And that's not to say anything about the quality of engineers. Mining's really, really tough. It's really tough to manage to be a profitable mining team, even though the rewards are so high, actually, because it's so volatile and there's so much upfront requirement of R&D before you can even, there's a lot of risk in terms of dedicating resource to a subnet. So yeah, I would actually fully agree with Gyles. The fact that we're actually still standing and then actually being able to scale as a mining team, I think within the space, is quite unique and quite an achievement.
What are you guys most excited for in Bittensor, in Tensora? What are you most excited for the future, looking forward?
I'll go first. I think the last 4 weeks we've been working with our investor and chairman on sort of putting together this roadmap and this plan of attack for the next 12 months on those 4 verticals I shared earlier. I think if we do 50% of what we think we can do, it's going to really change the trajectory of Tensora, and also for the benefit of Bittensor as well. And so for me, like, to be within a team that's now 10, to look that we've got a hiring plan to take us to 60 to 70 heads within 12 months. you're a real technology business at that point. With 4 different revenue streams, products, front ends, and just a C-suite of individuals that we're already speaking to that, from a personal standpoint, I can't wait to learn from them. I can't wait to go on that journey and build what we believe would be, one of the most recognized Bittensor holding companies there are. And I think we've got a really big, audacious goal, and it's like, how do we get there? But the pathway that we've sort of outlined is not impossible. It's all just completing the actions.
From 10 to 60 or 70 heads. Did I hear that correctly? 60 or 70.
That's correct.
That would make you the biggest team in Bittensor, I believe. I think Macrocosmos is at around like 40 or something. I think OpenTensor has a bit more than them, but probably not by much.
Yeah, I got a text off Will the other day that I'm sure he won't mind me sharing, but I think he's planning to hire another 50 this year. So I think Will will still be, so if Will's watching this, you've still got us. Still got one over on us, but yeah, we're going to be very aggressive.
Yeah, no, that's 6x growth is very aggressive growth for a year. What you said, 4 verticals. Those are mining, subnets. I assume those are 2 of them. What are the 4 verticals that you guys are interested in building in?
Yeah, so the validator, and then the asset management side of the business. And then obviously we will have a product team, but the product team will service all verticals.
Okay, that makes sense. I'll wrap it up with this question. One last question for you guys. What advice do you have for people looking to get involved in Bittensor mining, since you have been a successful Bittensor mining team thus far?
I think it's there's just incredibly smart people in the space, and you will be outdone, and you'll just be humble. I think this is the funniest thing to watch. Well, not funny. It's good fun to watch. Our new hires come in. They're often, we hire incredibly intelligent guys. They've probably been some of the smartest guys on their teams before. Come and join Bittensor, and they just cannot compete on their own, and it's like actually just realizing you have to work in a team. So to be honest, probably my best advice would be if you can get yourself into some kind of syndicate which shares knowledge. If you're a single miner, I think that would be the best thing for you. Like doing this on your own as a single miner, there are some absolute, as Charles said, demons out there. Like, there's John Durbin, there's Complex, to name a few, who just somehow managed to just punch way above their weight. And you know what? Hats off to them. I think they alone do more than we do as a whole company, which is just incredibly impressive. And again, humbling for us, right? But generally, my honest advice would be find a few other individuals and try and get in on a syndicate, because I think that would probably actually be the best way. Yeah.
The only other thing I'd say is if you do it on your own, just make sure you've got really good DDoS protection, because it's the Wild West out there, and you'll be catching them from left, right, and center. So, like, wear protection, I'd say, if you're a miner in Bittensor.
I like that.
All right. Well, Jack, Gyles, great chatting with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Grant.